The first time Aiden Lawson found the orc woman sleeping outside his cottage door, he assumed she would be gone by afternoon, like a wolf that had taken temporary shelter from the mountain wind. He stood in the doorway with his morning coffee cooling in his hand, staring down at her broad shoulders rising and falling with each breath, her green skin almost luminous in the early light. She had positioned herself directly against the wooden door, knees drawn up, one scarred hand resting on the pommel of a crude sword. Her black hair, thick and unkempt, fell across a face that might have been beautiful if not for the exhaustion etched into every line, the small tusks jutting from her lower jaw, and the purple bruise spreading across her temple. Aiden stepped carefully over her sleeping form, his boots finding purchase in the dirt path that led from his door to the barn. He had learned in his years on this frontier homestead that getting involved in the troubles of others, particularly orcs, was a quick way to invite violence into an otherwise peaceful life. He had come to these mountains specifically to escape violence, to leave behind the war that had taken 5 years of his youth and replace them with nightmares. The orc woman was not his concern. She would wake, realize she had found no refuge here, and move on. But when he returned from feeding his chickens and the 2 goats that provided his milk, she was still there, curled against his door like a hound that had finally found its master's threshold. Her breathing had not changed. Whatever had driven her to his door had also driven her to the edge of complete collapse. Aiden stood looking down at her for a long moment, then stepped over her again and went inside, closing the door perhaps more firmly than necessary. Through the single window of his cottage, he watched the tree line for any sign of pursuit, any indication that her presence would bring soldiers or orc hunters or clan warriors to his door. He had built this life in isolation for a reason. The cottage, the barn, the small garden plot, the chicken coop, all of it represented a carefully constructed solitude that he had earned through blood and nightmares. The day passed. He worked in his garden, turning soil for the late spring planting. He repaired a section of fence where deer had been testing the boundaries. He split wood, though his supply was still adequate, simply because the repetitive motion helped quiet his mind. And through it all, the orc woman slept against his door. When evening came and the mountain air turned cold with the promise of frost, Aiden made himself a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and salted pork. He ate at his small table, the single lantern casting more shadows than light, and tried not to think about the woman outside. She would wake soon. She would leave. This was not his problem. But when he opened the door to dump his wash water, she was still there, and in the lamplight that spilled from his cottage he could see that she was shivering, her lips tinged with blue despite her orcish constitution. Her sword hand still gripped the pommel, but loosely now, as if even in sleep she was losing her ability to defend herself. Aiden dumped the water, stepped back inside, and closed the door. He stood there for several minutes, his hand still on the latch, fighting with himself. Then he cursed under his breath, grabbed the old wool blanket from the foot of his bed, opened the door, and draped it over her shoulders without touching her directly. She did not wake. He went back inside, barred the door, and lay in his bed staring at the ceiling beams until sleep finally claimed him. The second morning she was still there, though she had pulled the blanket tighter around herself and shifted position slightly. The bruise on her temple had darkened to a deep purple black, and Aiden could see now that there were other injuries, scrapes across her knuckles, a tear in her leather vest that revealed a bandaged wound beneath, and dried blood caked in her hair on the side of her head. Whatever had happened to her had been violent and recent. Aiden went about his morning routine, stepping over her again, though this time he hesitated. She had not moved for what must be nearly 24 hours, Even orcs needed water. Even warriors could die of exposure and exhaustion. He fed his animals, collected 3 eggs from the chicken coop, and made himself breakfast. As the porridge bubbled on his small stove, he stared at the door and waged the same internal war he had waged the night before. This was not his concern. She was not his responsibility. Getting involved would only bring trouble. But when the porridge was done, he ladled some into a wooden bowl, filled a cup with water from his bucket, and opened the door. He set both beside her, just within reach of her hand, and went back inside without waiting to see if she would wake. From the window he watched. An hour passed. Then the orc woman stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She stared at the bowl and cup for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then looked around with the careful alertness of someone who had survived by never being caught unaware. Her eyes found the cottage, found the window, and for a brief moment, her gaze locked with Aiden's before he stepped back into the shadows. When he looked again, she had consumed the porridge and drained the cup, and both sat neatly beside her as she settled back against the door, pulling his blanket around her shoulders. The third morning followed the same pattern. Aiden woke, found her still there, and this time when he stepped over her, he saw that her eyes were open, watching him with an intensity that made his hand move instinctively toward the knife at his belt. But she did not speak, did not move, simply watched him pass and then closed her eyes again as if the effort of keeping them open was too much. He left her porridge and water again. This time she consumed them while he watched from the window, her movements slow but deliberate. She was healing, he realized, or at least beginning to. Whatever injuries she carried, her body was working to repair them, but that process required food, water, and rest. And for reasons he could not fathom, she had chosen his door as the place to find those things. On the 4th morning, Aiden found himself preparing the porridge before he had even gone out to check on her, as if feeding the orc woman had become part of his routine. This realization irritated him. He had not asked for this responsibility. He had not invited her presence. Yet here he was, ladling porridge into a bowl like she was a stray dog he had decided to feed. When he opened the door, she was sitting up, her back still against the wooden frame but her eyes fully alert now. The bruise on her temple had faded to a mottled yellow-green, matching the tone of her skin in an unfortunate way. But her eyes were clear, and when he set the bowl and cup beside her, she spoke for the first time. Why? Her voice was rough, as if from disuse or injury, and carried the slight guttural accent common to orcs. The single word hung in the air between them, weighted with more meaning than its simplicity suggested. Aiden looked down at her, this orc woman who had turned his doorstep into a sanctuary, and found he had no good answer. "You looked like you needed it," he said finally, and went back inside before she could respond. But the word haunted him through the day. Why indeed? He had told himself he wanted no part of others' troubles. Yet here he was, providing aid to someone who could easily bring danger to his door. Orc clans did not look kindly on members who fraternized with humans. Human settlements did not welcome orcs, especially not injured orc warriors who looked like they had fled from battle or worse. The 5th morning brought a change. When Aiden opened his door, the orc woman was standing, though she swayed slightly and kept one hand braced against the door frame. She was taller than he had realized, nearly matching his own height, and despite her evident injuries, there was a strength to her frame that spoke of years of training and combat. She wore the traditional garb of an orc clan warrior, leather vest over a rough spun tunic, reinforced trousers, and boots that had seen hard travel. Her sword hung at her hip, and Aiden noticed for the first time that it was of decent quality, not the crude weapon he had initially assumed. "I am Greshna," she said, and the formality in her tone suggested this was a significant gesture. "Formerly of the Iron Peak clan. Formerly." That single word explained much. She had been cast out then or had left. Either way, she was clanless, which made her vulnerable in ways that went beyond physical injury. "Aiden Lawson," he replied, and did not offer the bowl and cup this time, simply held them in his hands. "You are recovered enough to move on, I think." Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment perhaps, or hurt, but she straightened her shoulders and nodded. "I will leave. I thank you for your kindness. It is more than I expected from a human." She turned to go, took 3 steps down the path, and stumbled. Aiden moved without thinking, catching her arm before she could fall completely. She was heavier than he expected, solid muscle and bone, and the heat of her skin through the rough fabric of her tunic suggested a fever. "You are not recovered," he said, and cursed himself even as the words left his mouth. "You need at least another day of rest." Greshna pulled her arm from his grasp but did not try to walk further. She stood swaying in the morning light, pride and exhaustion warring in her expression. And finally she nodded once, a sharp jerk of her head that suggested the admission cost her dearly. Aiden guided her back to the door, set the bowl and cup beside where she lowered herself carefully to the ground, and went inside to wage yet another war with his better judgment. By midday, he had lost that war entirely. He opened the door to find Greshna still sitting there, the bowl and cup empty beside her, and he spoke before he could stop himself. "There is a space in the barn. It would be warmer than the ground. The hay is clean." She looked up at him with those dark eyes, intelligent and wary, and he could see her weighing the offer for traps and hidden costs. Finally she nodded. "I accept. I will not be a burden longer than necessary." Aiden helped her to the barn, and if he noticed how much of her weight she leaned against him, he did not mention it. He showed her the small tack room where he stored his tools, cleared a space among the odds and ends, and brought her several armfuls of clean hay to fashion into a bed. She watched him work with an expression he could not read, and when he brought her the blanket she had used for the past 4 nights, she took it with something that might have been gratitude softening her features. "I will repay this debt," she said. "When I am well, I will work for you. Whatever you need. I am strong and I am skilled in many things." Aiden wanted to refuse, to tell her no debt existed and she owed him nothing. But he recognized the pride in her words, the need to maintain dignity even in desperate circumstances, and so he simply nodded. "We will discuss it when you are recovered." The 6th morning, Aiden woke to find the barn door open and Greshna sitting on the small bench outside the barn, her face turned toward the rising sun. She had removed the bandage from beneath her vest, and he could see the injury there was healing well, a long shallow cut that had scabbed over cleanly. Her hair, still tangled and matted with dried blood, gleamed with an almost blue-black sheen in the early light. He brought her breakfast without comment, and this time he brought enough for 2, settling himself on the other end of the bench with his own bowl. They ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have reached an unspoken understanding. "What brought you to my door?" Aiden asked finally, when both bowls were empty and the sun had climbed higher in the sky. Greshna was silent for so long he thought she might not answer. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady. "I was to be married. A political arrangement, an alliance between my clan and the Blackstone clan to the north. I refused. My father, the chieftain, said I had no choice. I said I would make my own choice. So I left in the night, and when they pursued me, I fought. I injured my brother in the fight. For that, I am cast out. If I return, I will be killed." She said it matter-of-factly, as if describing the weather, but Aiden heard the pain beneath the words. To be cast out from one's clan was a death sentence of another kind, a severing from everything that gave an orc identity and purpose. And you came here because... I did not come here specifically. I fled into the mountains and collapsed from my wounds and exhaustion. I woke to find myself at your door as if some fate had guided me here. She turned to look at him directly. I did not expect kindness. Humans and orcs do not have a history of kindness between our peoples. Aiden thought of the war, of the orc clans he had fought against, of the friends he had lost to orcish axes and arrows. He thought of the propaganda that had painted orcs as mindless savages, as creatures without honor or feeling. And he looked at this woman beside him, exiled for refusing an arranged marriage, and saw only another person trying to survive in a world that offered little mercy. No, he agreed. We do not, but perhaps we should. Something changed between them in that moment, some invisible wall crumbling into dust. Grazka smiled, a small expression made awkward by her tusks but genuine nonetheless, and Aiden found himself smiling back. By evening, Grazka was moving around the homestead with increasing confidence. Her fever had broken, and though she was still recovering her full strength, she insisted on helping with the chores. Aiden found her in the chicken coop, speaking softly to the hens in her own language as she collected eggs with surprising gentleness for someone with such large, scarred hands. They seem to like you, he observed from the doorway. All creatures respond to respect and kindness, Grazka replied, carefully placing the last egg in the basket he had left there. Chickens are no different than people in that regard. They prepared dinner together that evening, Aiden cooking while Grazka watched with open curiosity. He realized she was studying his methods, his ingredients, the way he built and maintained the fire in his small stove. Orc cuisine, he knew from his military days, relied heavily on roasting and open flames. The subtleties of baking and stewing were foreign to their culture. You are welcome to stay in the cottage, Aiden said as they ate, the words coming out more abruptly than he intended. The barn is adequate for storage, but it is not meant for long-term habitation. Grazka looked at him with surprise. That would not be proper. You have already shown me great kindness. I will not impose further. It is not an imposition if I offer it freely, Aiden said. And you said you would repay the debt by working. I can think of many tasks that need attention around the homestead. The garden needs to be expanded if we are to feed two through the winter. The fence line needs reinforcement. The barn roof has a leak I have been ignoring for months. If you are to work, you might as well be comfortable. He used the word we without thinking, and from the way Grazka's eyes widened slightly, she had noticed. But she did not comment on it, simply nodded her acceptance. Then I will stay for a time until the debt is repaid, but I will sleep near the door. I am accustomed to keeping watch, and old habits are difficult to break. On the 7th night, Aiden woke to a sound outside his cottage, a low keening that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. He grabbed the sword he kept beside his bed. Old habits were indeed difficult to break, and moved to the window. In the moonlight, he could see Grazka sitting upright near the door, her face turned to the sky, and the sound was coming from her. It was not a wail of pain or fear, but something deeper, more primal. A grief song, he realized, remembering what little he had learned of orc culture. She was mourning what she had lost. Aiden stood at the window for a long time, listening to that ancient sorrow pour out into the mountain night. Then he made a decision that would change everything. He walked to the door, unbarred it, and opened it wide. Grazka fell silent immediately, turning to look up at him with eyes that glistened with unshed tears in the moonlight. Come inside, Aiden said simply. You do not need to keep watch alone anymore. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her struggling with pride, with vulnerability, with the intimacy his offer implied. Then she rose to her feet, gathered the blanket around her shoulders, and stepped across the threshold into his home. Aiden closed the door behind her and barred it, and when he turned back, Grazka was standing in the center of his small cottage, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. The single room that served as his kitchen, dining area, and sleeping quarters must have seemed impossibly small to her, cramped and human in a way that emphasized how different their worlds had been until now. "I will make a bed by the fire," she said, but Aiden shook his head. "The bed is large enough for two, if you trust me enough to share it without fear. I give you my word as a former soldier of the crown that you will not be harmed or dishonored under my roof." It was a formal oath, the kind his unit had been taught to use when offering protection to civilians during the war. Grazka recognized it for what it was, a binding promise, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "I accept," she said quietly. "And I offer you the same oath, by the old ways of my people. You will be safe with me." They settled into the bed from opposite sides, maintaining a careful distance in the middle, both hyper-aware of the other's presence. Aiden could hear Grazka's breathing, slower and deeper than his own, could feel the warmth radiating from her body in the cool night air. He lay staring at the ceiling beams, wondering what madness had possessed him to invite an orc woman, a warrior at that, to share his bed. But when Grazka spoke, her voice soft in the darkness, he knew he had made the right choice. "Thank you," she said, "for opening the door, for all of it." "You are welcome," Aiden replied, and meant it with a depth of feeling that surprised him. They fell asleep like that. Two strangers from warring peoples sharing a bed and a tentative trust that felt more precious than gold. The days that followed established a new rhythm to Aiden's life. Grazka proved true to her word about repaying her debt, throwing herself into the work of the homestead with an intensity that sometimes concerned him. She was up before dawn, tending to the animals with a care that belied her warrior background. She worked in the garden with methodical precision, her strong hands surprisingly gentle when handling seedlings. She reinforced the fence line with a skill that spoke of practical knowledge beyond combat, weaving new saplings into the existing structure in a way that would provide years of strength. But it was the small moments that Aiden found himself treasuring. The way Grazka hummed while she worked, a low melodic sound that was distinctly orcish but somehow soothing. The way she studied everything he did with an intense curiosity, asking questions about human agriculture, human cooking, human customs. The way she laughed, a surprised bark of sound that seemed to shock her every time, as if she had forgotten that laughter was something she could still do. 2 weeks after that 7th night, Aiden found her on the barn roof, stripped down to her tunic and trousers, her vest discarded in the heat of midday. She was replacing the damaged shingles with new ones Aiden had cut months ago, but never gotten around to installing. Her green skin gleamed with sweat in the sunlight, and the muscles of her arms and shoulders flexed as she worked. Aiden found himself staring longer than was strictly proper, noticing for the first time the undeniable beauty in her strength, the grace in movements that had been honed by years of training. "The view is better from up here," Grazka called down, and there was amusement in her voice that suggested she had noticed his attention. "You should come see." Aiden climbed the ladder and settled himself carefully on the roof beside her. She was right. From this height he could see for miles, the mountain peaks stretching away in every direction, the valley below where a small stream wound through the trees like a silver ribbon. "It is beautiful," Grazka said softly. "I understand why you chose this place." "I needed somewhere far from people," Aiden admitted. Somewhere the war could not follow me. Did it work? He was silent for a moment, considering. It did, until recently. Now I find I do not mind the company as much as I thought I would. Grazka turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression that made his breath catch. I am glad, she said simply. I have been alone for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to be welcome somewhere. They sat together on the roof for a long time, neither speaking, simply existing in each other's presence. When they finally climbed down, Aiden's hand lingered on Grazka's arm a moment longer than necessary to steady her, and she did not pull away. That night, as they lay in the bed they now shared without awkwardness, Aiden found himself acutely aware of the diminishing space between them. What had started as opposite edges had gradually become a companionable middle, close enough that he could feel the warmth of Grazka's body even without touching. He wondered if she felt it too, this growing pull between them, or if he was imagining things that were not there. Tell me about your clan, he said into the darkness, wanting to hear her voice, to know more about the woman who had so thoroughly disrupted his solitary life. Grazka was quiet for a moment. The Iron Peak clan is old and traditional. We hold to the warrior codes that date back centuries. Honor above all, strength in combat, loyalty to the chieftain. I was raised to be a warrior, trained from childhood to fight and lead. My father had hoped I would marry well, cement alliances, perhaps eventually lead the clan myself. But you refused the marriage. I refused to be a bargaining piece. The man they chose for me was cruel. I saw how he treated those weaker than himself, how he used his strength to intimidate rather than protect. That is not the warrior way, regardless of what my father claimed, so I said no. That took courage. It took foolishness, Grazka said, but there was no real bitterness in her voice. I knew what the cost would be, but I could not force myself to accept a life that would have destroyed who I am. Aiden reached out in the darkness, found her hand and squeezed it gently. Then I am grateful for your foolishness. Otherwise, you would not be here. Grazka's fingers tightened around his, and when she spoke again, her voice was rough with emotion. I am grateful too. Even if this is temporary, even if I must eventually move on, I am grateful to have known you, Aiden Lawson. Who says it must be temporary? The words were out before Aiden could consider them, but once spoken, he found he did not want to take them back. You said you would work until the debt was repaid, but I say the debt was repaid the first time you made me laugh. Everything else has been a gift, freely given and freely received. Stay because you want to, not because you owe me anything. He felt rather than saw Grazka turn toward him in the darkness. You would have me stay. Even knowing what I am, what danger my presence might bring, I would have you stay, Aiden confirmed. If that is what you want. It is, Grazka whispered. More than I have wanted anything in a long time. They fell asleep that night with their hands still clasped between them, a silent promise of something neither was quite ready to name. The summer deepened, and with it, the connection between Aiden and Grazka grew stronger. They worked side by side through long days, their movements becoming synchronized as they learned each other's rhythms and patterns. The garden flourished under their combined care, rows of vegetables reaching toward the sun with vigorous health. The homestead took on an air of permanence it had never quite achieved when Aiden lived there alone, as if the addition of another person had transformed it from a hiding place into a true home. But there were challenges too. One morning, Aiden returned from checking his snares to find Grazka standing rigid at the edge of his property, staring at a group of riders on the road below. Even from a distance, he could see they were human, likely travelers or traders passing through on their way to the settlements further west. They will not come up here, Aiden said quietly, coming to stand beside her. This homestead is too isolated and there is nothing here worth the climb. But if they did, Greshna's hand rested on the pommel of her sword, a habitual gesture when she felt threatened. What would you do? I would tell them you are under my protection, Aiden said without hesitation. I would make it clear that any threat to you is a threat to me. Greshna turned to look at him, surprise and something warmer in her eyes. You would fight your own kind for me. I would fight anyone who tried to harm you, Aiden said, and realized as he spoke the words that they were absolutely true. Somewhere in the past weeks, this orc woman had become more important to him than his own safety, more precious than the solitude he had once guarded so fiercely. The riders passed without incident, but the encounter left both of them shaken, a reminder that the world beyond their mountain homestead was not kind to unusual friendships, let alone whatever was growing between them. That night, Greshna taught Aiden some of the combat techniques of her clan. They started simply, with basic defensive stances and blocks, working in the clearing beside the cottage in the long summer twilight. Aiden was surprised by how much he had forgotten from his soldier days, how his body had grown accustomed to the peaceful rhythms of farming rather than the sharp alertness of combat. Greshna was a patient teacher, correcting his form with gentle touches that sent electricity through his skin, demonstrating techniques with a fluid grace that made fighting look like dancing. When she moved, there was a beauty to it that transcended the violence inherent in the motions, an artistry born of years of dedicated practice. You were a good soldier, Greshna observed after they had been working for over an hour. I can see it in how your body remembers, even when your mind has forgotten. You have killed orcs in battle. It was not a question, but Aiden answered anyway. Yes, during the war I killed many orcs. It was what we were taught to do, what we were ordered to do. They were the enemy, and we never questioned that. Do you regret it? Aiden considered the question carefully. I regret the war. I regret that we were taught to see each other as monsters rather than people. But I cannot regret surviving, and survival in war sometimes requires doing terrible things. Greshna nodded slowly. I have killed humans in battle too. When the war came to our territories, we defended ourselves. I do not regret protecting my people, but I regret that protection required taking lives. She paused, then added softly, I am glad we met after the war ended. I am glad we do not have to be enemies. So am I, Aiden said, and pulled her into an embrace before he could overthink the action. Greshna stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed into his arms, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. They stood like that in the fading light, two former warriors finding peace in each other's presence, and Aiden felt something settle in his chest that he had not even realized was unsettled. As summer turned toward autumn, the first hints of change colored the leaves on the mountain trees. Aiden and Greshna worked to prepare the homestead for winter, cutting and stacking wood, preserving vegetables from the garden, reinforcing the barn and cottage against the storms that would come. It was hard work, but satisfying, and Aiden found himself looking forward to the prospect of winter with Greshna beside him, the two of them weathering the cold together. But late one afternoon, as they were securing the last of the wood under cover, Greshna suddenly went still, her head cocked to one side in a listening posture Aiden had learned meant danger. Someone is coming, she said quietly. 3, maybe 4, moving carefully, trying to be quiet. Aiden felt his old soldier instincts surge to life. Inside. Now. They moved quickly into the cottage, and Aiden retrieved his sword while Greshna drew her own weapon. They waited in tense silence, listening as footsteps approached up the path. Then a voice called out, rough and speaking in the orcish tongue. Greshna's face went pale, which was a disturbing thing to see on someone with green skin. "It is my brother," she whispered. "He has found me." Aiden positioned himself at the window where he could see without being easily seen. 4 orcs stood in the clearing, all armed and armored in the style of clan warriors. The one in front was larger than the others, with the same black hair and strong features as Grazka, and a long scar across his face that looked relatively fresh. "Grazka," the orc called again. "I know you are here. I tracked you across half the mountains. Come out and face me with honor, or I will burn this human dwelling to the ground with you in it." Grazka moved toward the door, but Aiden caught her arm. "Wait. What will he do if you go out there?" "He will try to kill me," Grazka said simply. "By our laws, I injured him and fled the clan. He has the right to challenge me to combat to restore his honor. If I refuse, I am a coward and he is justified in hunting me down like an animal." "Then you will not face him alone," Aiden said. "This is my land, my home. If he wants to fight, he fights both of us." "No." Grazka gripped his shoulders, her eyes desperate. "You do not understand. This is clan law, clan honor. If you interfere, you become part of the blood debt. My brother will hunt you to the ends of the earth to fulfill his obligation. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me. And I will not let you walk out there to die," Aiden countered. "We find another way." But there was no time to plan. The orc outside, Grazka's brother, had apparently tired of waiting. He said something to his companions and they began to spread out, clearly preparing to surround the cottage. "Last chance, sister," he called. "Come out or we come in." Grazka looked at Aiden and he saw in her eyes a depth of emotion that made his heart ache. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I brought this to your door. I should have kept moving, should have never stayed." "I am not sorry," Aiden said fiercely. "Not for a single moment, and we are not done yet." He moved to the door and opened it before Grazka could stop him, stepping out into the clearing with his sword at his side but not raised in immediate threat. The 4 orcs stopped their advance, staring at him with expressions that ranged from surprise to contempt. "This is my land," Aiden said clearly, speaking in the common tongue that most orcs understood even if they did not prefer it. "You are trespassing. State your business and then leave." Grazka's brother laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the mountains. "A human protecting an orc. This is the exile's great plan. To hide behind a human male like a coward." "I hide behind no one," Grazka said, emerging from the cottage to stand beside Aiden. "And I am no coward. You want to challenge me, Crag? Then issue the challenge properly before witnesses as the old ways demand. Not like a common bandit threatening to burn down buildings." Crag's expression shifted, becoming more formal. He straightened, placed his fist over his heart in the traditional gesture, and spoke in Orcish. Aiden could not understand the words, but he understood the ritual nature of what was happening. This was an official challenge, bound by the laws and traditions of the orc clans. Grazka responded in kind, her voice steady despite the fear Aiden could sense radiating from her. When she finished, she turned to him and spoke quietly. "He has challenged me to single combat at dawn tomorrow. By our laws, I must accept or be forever dishonored. The fight will be to first blood or yield, not to death, but Crag is much stronger than I am. I do not know if I can defeat him." "Then we train tonight," Aiden said, "and we find a way." Crag and his companions retreated to make camp at the edge of Aiden's property, within sight but maintaining the formal distance required by their challenge. Aiden and Grazka returned to the cottage, and immediately, Aiden began going through everything he knew about combat, everything he had learned in the war, searching for an advantage that might help Grazka survive the coming fight. "Your brother is larger and stronger," Aiden said as they worked through the night, practicing techniques and strategies by lantern light. "But you are faster. I have seen you move, seen how fluid your combat style is. Use that. Do not try to match his strength. Use his size against him." They worked until exhaustion threatened to defeat them more thoroughly than any opponent could, and finally collapsed into bed with only a few hours until dawn. Aiden held Grazka close, feeling her heart beating against his chest, and made a silent vow that he would not let her face this alone. Tradition and honor be damned. "If I fall," Grazka whispered in the darkness, "promise me you will not do anything foolish. My brother will honor the terms of the challenge. He will not harm you unless you interfere." "I promise," Aiden lied, knowing even as he said it that he would break that promise without hesitation if it meant saving her life. Dawn came too quickly, painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink that seemed grotesquely beautiful for what was about to unfold. Crag and his companions were waiting in the clearing, and they had marked out a circle for the combat in the traditional way, using stones and branches to define the boundaries. Grazka stripped off her vest and outer tunic, standing in just her undershirt and trousers, her sword held loosely in her right hand. Crag did the same, revealing a body covered in scars and marked with clan tattoos that Aiden recognized as symbols of rank and achievement. This was no ordinary warrior. Crag was clearly someone of importance in the Iron Peak clan. The fight began with a formality that surprised Aiden, both warriors saluting each other in the clan way, acknowledging the honor in their combat even as they prepared to harm each other. Then they began to circle, and the formality vanished as they crashed together in a flurry of blows that Aiden could barely follow. Crag fought with brutal efficiency, each strike designed to overwhelm through sheer power. But Grazka danced around him, using her speed exactly as Aiden had suggested, deflecting rather than blocking, moving constantly to avoid being pinned down. For several minutes it seemed evenly matched, and Aiden felt a flutter of hope. Then Crag changed tactics, feinting left before spinning right, and his blade caught Grazka across the ribs. It was not a deep cut, but blood immediately welled up, staining her undershirt. First blood. By the terms of the challenge, the fight should have been over, but Crag did not stop. He pressed his advantage, driving Grazka back toward the edge of the circle, his blade moving in patterns designed to kill, not to wound. Aiden realized with cold horror that Crag had never intended to honor the traditional terms. He meant to kill his sister and claim it was an accident of combat. Aiden moved without conscious thought, grabbing a heavy branch from the woodpile and swinging it with all his strength at Crag's head. The impact sent the orc stumbling sideways, breaking his momentum and giving Grazka time to recover her footing. Crag roared in fury, turning toward Aiden with murder in his eyes. "You dare interfere. You have violated the terms of the challenge. You violated them first." Aiden shot back, raising the branch like a club even though he knew it would be useless against a trained orc warrior. First blood was drawn. The challenge was complete. You were trying to murder her. "What is the life of an exile?" Crag snarled. "She has no honor, no clan. She is nothing." "She is everything," Aiden said, and realized as he spoke that it was true. Somewhere in the past weeks, Grazka had become his whole world. "And you will not touch her again." Crag advanced on Aiden, raising his sword, but Grazka threw herself between them, her own blade coming up to block her brother's strike. The impact sent her to her knees, but she held firm. "Enough," she shouted. "The human is under my protection. If you want to kill someone, kill me, but leave him out of this." "You defend a human over your own blood." Crag looked genuinely shocked. "You have fallen so far, sister. Our father was right to cast you out." "Our father was wrong," Grazka said, rising to her feet with obvious pain. "And so are you. I have found more honor in this human's kindness than I ever found in our clan's traditions. Kill me if you must, but know that by doing so you prove yourself the dishonorable one." For a long moment, the clearing was silent except for the sound of heavy breathing. Then one of Crag's companions, an older orc with gray streaking his hair, stepped forward and spoke in Orcish. Whatever he said, it was clearly directed at Crag, and the tone was reproachful. Crag responded angrily, but the older orc persisted, and gradually Aiden saw something shift in Crag's expression. The murder rage faded, replaced by something more complex: shame, perhaps, or uncertainty. Finally Crag lowered his sword and spoke to Grazka in Orcish. She responded, and what followed was clearly a conversation rather than threats. It went on for several minutes, voices rising and falling, until finally Crag sheathed his sword and placed his fist over his heart in what Aiden had learned was a gesture of respect. Grazka returned the gesture, then turned to Aiden. "It is over. Crag has acknowledged that he violated the terms of the challenge, and that your intervention was therefore justified. He will report to our father that he found no trace of me in the mountains and that I am likely dead. I am free." Just like that. Aiden could not quite believe it. "Not just like that," Grazka said softly. "Crag has shown mercy which is not required by our laws. It is a gift, and one I will not forget." She turned back to her brother and spoke again in Orcish, her voice thick with emotion. Crag nodded once, then gestured to his companions, and the 4 orcs left the clearing, heading back down the mountain the way they had come. When they were out of sight, Grazka's legs gave out and she collapsed. Aiden caught her, feeling the hot wetness of blood soaking through her shirt. The cut on her ribs was deeper than he had initially thought, and the exertion of the fight had made it worse. He carried her back to the cottage, laid her gently on the bed, and retrieved his limited medical supplies. As he cleaned and bandaged the wound, Grazka watched him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "You called me everything," she said quietly. "Did you mean it?" Aiden's hands stilled in their work. He looked up at her, this fierce orc woman who had slept outside his door for 7 nights, who had worked beside him through the summer, who had fought her own brother rather than let him come to harm, and he knew there was only one answer he could give. "Yes," he said simply. "I meant it. You are everything to me, Grazka. Somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Tears spilled down Grazka's cheeks, carving tracks through the grime and sweat of the fight. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you since that 7th night when you opened the door and invited me in. I have loved you through every moment since. But I was afraid to say it, afraid that it would somehow make it less real, or that you could not possibly feel the same way about an orc." Aiden finished bandaging her wound, then lay down beside her on the bed, careful not to jostle her injury. He took her hand in his, marveling at how perfectly it seemed to fit despite the differences in their physiology. "I see you," he said softly. "Not an orc, not a warrior, not an exile, just Grazka, just you, and that is who I love." They lay together as the morning sun streamed through the window. 2 people from different worlds who had found in each other something neither had known they were searching for. Eventually, Grazka fell asleep, exhausted from the fight and the emotional toll of the morning. Aiden watched her sleep, studying the planes of her face, the small tusks that jutted from her lower jaw, the pointed ears that twitched occasionally even in sleep. She was beautiful. She was his, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never doubted that. The wound on Grazka's ribs healed slowly, and Aiden insisted she rest even though she protested that she was fine after only a few days. He took over most of the chores, working from dawn to dusk to keep the homestead running while she recovered. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, and Grazka began to teach him her language while he taught her to read and write in the common tongue. "Why did you never learn to read?" Aiden asked one evening as he watched her laboriously form letters on a slate he had found in a trunk of old belongings. "Clan warriors do not need to raid," Grazka said, not looking up from her work. "Fighting, hunting, survival, these are the important skills. Words on a page are for shamans and elders. But you are not a clan warrior anymore," Aiden pointed out gently. "You can be whatever you want now." Grazka set down the chalk and looked at him. "I am still learning what that means. For my entire life I was defined by my clan, by my role as a warrior. Now I am defined by nothing, and it is both terrifying and liberating." "You are defined by your choices," Aiden said. "And you have chosen to be here with me. That is enough." "Is it?" Grazka's voice was uncertain. "What kind of life can we have, Aiden? You are human, I am orc. Both our peoples would see this as wrong, as unnatural. We can hide here in the mountains, but for how long? What happens when you need supplies from the settlements? What happens if other orcs come looking for me? What happens when you realize that loving me means cutting yourself off from your own kind?" Aiden considered her questions seriously, because they deserved serious consideration. She was right, the relationship they had built existed in a bubble of isolation, protected from the prejudices and pressures of the wider world. But eventually, that bubble would burst, and they would have to face the consequences of their choice to be together. "I have been cut off from my own kind since the war ended," Aiden said finally. "I came to these mountains specifically to escape humans and their expectations. If I have to choose between society and you, I choose you. Every time, without hesitation." "You say that now, but I say it always," Aiden interrupted. "Grazka, I am not some young man prone to flights of fancy. I am a veteran who has seen the worst of what people can do to each other. I know my own mind and I know my own heart. You are not a burden or a complication. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." Grazka reached across the space between them and pulled him into a kiss. It was their first kiss, and it was awkward and clumsy because of the difference in their physiognomy, but it was also perfect. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "I am not good at this," Grazka admitted. "Orc courtship is very different. Mostly it involves demonstrating strength and combat prowess." "You have already done that," Aiden said with a laugh. "You proved your strength when you went up against your brother. Now you just have to get used to a quieter kind of courtship, one involving lots of talking and shared meals and sitting by the fire together." "I think I can manage that," Grazka said, and kissed him again. As autumn deepened and the first snows dusted the mountain peaks, Aiden and Grazka settled into a new rhythm. They were no longer simply housemates or friends, but partners in every sense of the word. They worked together, ate together, slept tangled in each other's arms, and slowly built a life that was uniquely theirs. But the specter of the outside world still loomed. One morning, as Aiden was preparing to make the long journey down to the nearest settlement for winter supplies, Grazka stopped him. "I should go with you," she said. "We are partners now. That means we face challenges together." Aiden shook his head. "The settlement is not ready for an orc, especially not one living with a human. It would cause trouble we do not need. So I am to hide, to pretend I do not exist whenever you interact with the rest of the world." Grazka's voice was sharp with hurt. "Is that the life you envision for us?" Aiden realized he had made a mistake, that his attempt to protect her had instead made her feel diminished. "No," he said firmly. "You are right. We are partners, and partners do not hide each other away. If you want to come, then you come. We face whatever happens together." The journey to the settlement took most of the day, and Aiden could feel his tension rising as they drew closer to civilization. He kept glancing at Grazka, who walked beside him with her head high and her hand never far from her sword. She had dressed in her cleanest clothes and braided her hair, but there was no hiding what she was. Any human who saw her would know immediately that she was an orc. The settlement was small, barely more than a dozen buildings clustered around a central square. As Aiden and Grazka entered, conversation stopped. People stared, their expressions ranging from shock to fear to hostility. Aiden felt Grazka tense beside him, but to her credit she did not reach for her weapon, simply kept walking as if she had every right to be there. They went to the trading post, where Aiden had established credit over the years through his occasional sales of furs and smoked meat. The trader, a weathered man named Harold, looked up as they entered and his eyes went wide. "Aiden," he said carefully, "this is unexpected." "I need supplies for winter," Aiden said, keeping his voice neutral. "The usual, and I will need to increase my order as I am now feeding too." Harold's eyes flicked to Grazka, who stood slightly behind Aiden but clearly ready to defend herself if necessary. "That is an orc," he said unnecessarily. "That is Grazka," Aiden corrected, "my partner, and she is under my protection." A long silence followed. Harold was clearly waging some internal debate, weighing profit against prejudice. Finally, profit won, as Aiden had known it would. Harold was a trader first and a bigot second. "Fine," he said shortly, "but I want payment up front, no credit." It was an insult, a suggestion that Aiden's word was no longer good now that he associated with orcs. Aiden felt his temper rise, but Grazka put a hand on his arm, a gentle pressure that said, "Let it go. It is not worth it." They completed the transaction in tense silence, and as they were loading their supplies onto the small cart Aiden had brought, a group of men approached from across the square. Aiden recognized them as locals, farmers and laborers who spent more time drinking than working. This was exactly the kind of trouble he had hoped to avoid. Well, the leader of the group said, a man named Curtis, who Aiden had always disliked. "Aiden Lawson, keeping company with greenskins now. My, how the mighty have fallen." "My business is my own," Aiden said evenly. "We are just leaving." "Not so fast," Curtis blocked their path, his companions spreading out to surround them. "See, we have a problem. We cannot have orcs thinking they are welcome in our settlement. Bad for morale, you understand, bad for safety." "Grazka has done nothing to threaten your safety," Aiden said, but his hand moved to his sword hilt. "Let us pass." "Or what? You will fight us," Curtis laughed. "There are 6 of us and 2 of you, one of you being a woman and an orc at that." Grazka stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace that made several of the men take involuntary steps backward. "I am an orc," she said clearly. "I am also a trained warrior of the Iron Peak clan. If you force this confrontation, I will defend myself and my partner, and I promise you, you will regret it." There was steel in her voice, a quiet certainty that she could back up her words. Curtis clearly recognized it too, because some of his bravado faded. But he was committed now, could not back down without losing face in front of his friends. "Big words for a greenskin," he said, but his hand moved toward the knife at his belt. What happened next unfolded in the space of a heartbeat. Curtis drew his knife, lunging toward Grazka. She sidestepped smoothly, caught his wrist and twisted. There was a sharp crack and Curtis screamed, dropping the knife. Before any of his companions could react, Grazka had drawn her sword and stood between them and Aiden, her blade reflecting the afternoon sun. "I broke his wrist," she said calmly. "I could have killed him. Remember that if you are considering whether to continue this foolishness." Curtis was cradling his injured wrist, his face pale with pain. His companions looked at each other uncertainly, then began backing away, clearly unwilling to face an orc warrior who had just demonstrated exactly how outmatched they were. "You will pay for this," Curtis spat at Aiden. "The settlement will not welcome you anymore." You and your orc whore can rot in your mountain hideaway." Aiden felt Grazka stiffen at the slur, and he put a calming hand on her shoulder. "We will be fine," he said, speaking to both her and Curtis. "We do not need your settlement's welcome. We have each other, and that is enough." They left quickly after that, loading the last of their supplies and heading back up the mountain trail. Neither spoke for a long time, processing what had happened. Finally, as they neared the homestead, Grazka broke the silence. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I have cost you your place in the settlement. You will not be able to trade there anymore." "There are other settlements," Aiden said, "further away but accessible, and honestly, I am relieved. Now we do not have to hide what we are to each other. We can simply be." "You really do not regret this?" Grazka's voice was vulnerable in a way that made Aiden's heart ache. "You do not regret choosing me?" Aiden stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I regret nothing. I love you, Grazka, all of you. Your strength, your honor, your kindness, your fierce determination. You are everything good in my life, and I will not apologize for that to anyone." Grazka pulled him into an embrace, burying her face in his shoulder. He felt her tears soaking through his shirt, and he held her tightly, offering comfort and strength. They stood like that for a long time, two people against the world, finding in each other the courage to face whatever came next. Winter came to the mountains with a vengeance, bringing deep snows and howling winds that rattled the cottage walls. But inside, Aiden and Grazka were warm, the fire always burning, their stores of food adequate, and their love growing deeper with each passing day. They developed new routines for the winter months. Grazka taught Aiden the traditional crafts of the orc clan's leatherworking, weapon maintenance, the art of creating fire even in the worst conditions. Aiden taught Grazka to cook human dishes, to read more advanced texts, to appreciate the subtle beauty in things like embroidery and woodcarving. They were learning each other's cultures, creating something new that was neither fully orc nor fully human, but uniquely theirs. One evening, as a particularly fierce storm raged outside, Aiden found himself watching Grazka as she worked on repairing a leather harness for their cart. Her face was intent on her work, the firelight playing across her green skin and turning it to gold, and he was struck by an overwhelming wave of love so intense it almost hurt. "Marry me," he said, the words coming out before he had consciously decided to speak them. Grazka looked up, surprise written clearly on her face. "What? Marry me?" Aiden repeated, more certain now. "I know we cannot do it in a human church or according to orc clan traditions, but we can make our own tradition. We can stand before whatever gods listen and pledge ourselves to each other. I want you to be my wife, Grazka. I want to spend every day of my life with you." Grazka set down the harness carefully, her hands shaking slightly. "You do not have to do this. I am already yours and you are already mine. We do not need formal vows." "I know I do not have to," Aiden said. I want to. I want to declare to the whole world that we belong to each other. I want to make a promise that is as binding as blood and as permanent as the mountains. I want to marry you." "Yes," Grazka said, and her smile was radiant. "Yes, I will marry you, by every god and spirit, yes." They came together in a kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate. The storm raged outside, but inside the cottage, Aiden and Grazka created their own heat, coming together with a desperation and tenderness that spoke of love finally acknowledged fully, finally celebrated without reservation. Later, as they lay tangled together in the bed, Grazka traced patterns on Aiden's chest with one finger. "How will we do this? The marriage, I mean. There is no one to officiate, no witnesses." "We will be our own witnesses," Aiden said. "We will create a ceremony that honors both our backgrounds. We will speak vows to each other, exchange tokens if you want, and consider ourselves bound in every way that matters." "I like that," Greshna said softly. "It feels right. Just us, making promises to each other without anyone else's approval or blessing needed." They spent the next few days preparing for their private ceremony. Aiden carved 2 matching rings from mountain oak, simple bands that would fit their different hand sizes. Greshna wove 2 cords from various fibers: wool, leather, and plant materials, each in both their colors, to symbolize the binding of their lives. Together they wrote vows, combining human and orcish traditions into something that felt true to both of them. On the solstice, the shortest day of the year, they stood together in the clearing outside their cottage as snow fell gently around them. They had dressed in their best clothes, Aiden in a clean shirt, and his only pair of trousers without patches, Greshna in her formal warrior garb with the clan symbols removed. They stood facing each other, holding hands, and spoke the vows they had written. Aiden went first. "Greshna, I pledge to you my life, my heart, and my loyalty. I promise to stand beside you in times of peace and times of struggle. I promise to honor your strength while supporting your vulnerabilities. I promise to love you every day in every way for as long as I draw breath. You are my partner, my love, and from this day forward, my wife." Greshna's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Aiden, I pledge to you my strength, my honor, and my devotion. I promise to defend you with my life and cherish you with my heart. I promise to learn from you and teach you, to grow with you and challenge you. I promise to love you fiercely and without reservation. You are my chosen one, my home, and from this day forward, my husband." They exchanged the rings and bound their wrists together with the cords Greshna had woven. Then, with their hands still joined, they kissed as husband and wife while the mountain snow blessed their union, and the ancient trees stood as their only witnesses. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that felt sacred, a physical manifestation of the vows they had spoken. And when they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, they both felt a sense of completeness that neither had known was possible. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and with the melting snow came new challenges. The supplies from the settlement were running low, and Aiden knew he would need to find a new trading partner. He had heard of a settlement further to the east, larger and reportedly more tolerant of unusual circumstances. He and Greshna made plans to travel there once the mountain passes were clear. But before they could make the journey, Greshna came to him one morning with news that changed everything. "I am with child," she said simply, and Aiden felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "A child, our child." He pulled her into his arms, joy and terror warring in his chest. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. The signs are unmistakable. By late autumn, we will be 3 instead of 2. Greshna's expression was complicated, happiness mixed with worry. "I do not know what this means for us, Aiden. Half-human, half-orc children are rare. Our peoples do not mix often. The child may face challenges we cannot fully prepare for." "Then we will face those challenges together," Aiden said firmly. "This child is a blessing, Greshna, a testament to our love. Whatever comes, we will handle it." Over the following months, they prepared for the arrival of their child with the same dedication they had brought to everything else in their life together. Aiden built a cradle from mountain pine, carved with protective symbols from both human and orcish traditions. Greshna sewed tiny clothes from the softest fabrics they had, working with a gentleness that belied her warrior training. They discussed names endlessly, trying to find something that would honor both their heritages without marking the child as too different from either. The pregnancy progressed well, though Greshna's orcish constitution meant she remained strong and active far longer than a human woman would have. She continued working around the homestead until Aiden insisted she rest, worried that she was pushing herself too hard. "I am not fragile," Grazka protested when he tried to take over her tasks. "Orc women work until the day they give birth and sometimes during. But you also need to take care of yourself and our child," Aiden countered. "Please, let me help. Let me care for you the way you have cared for me." Grazka relented, though grudgingly, and allowed herself to be pampered in ways that were clearly foreign to her upbringing. Aiden made sure she had the best food, the most comfortable seating, and endless patience for her mood swings and physical discomfort. In return, she taught him about Orcish childbirth traditions, preparing him for what to expect when the time came. As summer deepened, Aiden finally made the journey to the eastern settlement, leaving Grazka behind with strict instructions to rest and not attempt any heavy work. The settlement was indeed larger than the one he had been barred from, and true to its reputation, the people there seemed less concerned with unusual circumstances. When Aiden carefully mentioned that he lived with his orc wife, the trader he spoke with simply nodded and quoted him fair prices without judgment. Encouraged, Aiden arranged for regular supply runs throughout the year. He also commissioned a few specialized items, proper medical supplies for the birth, some luxury items to celebrate the child's arrival, and books on child-rearing from both human and orcish perspectives. The trader promised to have everything ready within a month. When Aiden returned to the homestead, he found Grazka in the garden, sitting on the bench they had built together, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was radiant. "The child is strong," she said. "I can feel it moving constantly, as if it is eager to enter the world." Aiden sat beside her, placing his own hand next to hers on her belly. He felt the flutter of movement beneath his palm and was overcome with awe. This was their child, created from love that should have been impossible, thriving against all odds. "Have you thought more about names?" he asked. "I have," Grazka said. "If it is a boy, I want to name him after your father, as is human custom. You have told me he was a good man, and I would honor that. If it is a girl, I want to name her after the first flower that blooms on the mountain in spring, the frost lily. Lilia." "Those are perfect," Aiden said, pulling her close. "Whatever the child is, they will carry both our heritages with pride." The birth came on a cool autumn evening, 3 weeks earlier than Grazka had predicted, but well within the range of normal for orcish pregnancies. Aiden had prepared as well as he could, but nothing could have truly prepared him for the reality of bringing a child into the world. Grazka labored with the stoic strength of her warrior training, but Aiden could see the pain and effort it cost her, and he felt helpless in ways he had not felt since the war. But Grazka was strong, and by dawn the next morning their child had arrived, a girl, healthy and screaming her displeasure at being thrust into the cold world. She had green-tinged skin lighter than Grazka's but darker than any human's, tiny pointed ears and no visible tusks, though Aiden knew those might develop as she grew. She was perfect. "Lilia," Grazka whispered, cradling the baby against her chest. "Our Lilia." Aiden looked down at his wife and daughter. This small family he had never expected to have, and felt a completeness he had not known was possible. Every trial, every struggle, every moment of doubt had led to this perfect tableau of love made manifest. The first months of Lilia's life were challenging in ways Aiden had not anticipated. The baby needed constant attention, feeding at all hours, crying when she was uncomfortable, and requiring a level of vigilance that left both parents exhausted. But there was also joy in every small milestone: the first time she smiled, the first time she gripped Aiden's finger with her tiny hand, the first time she laughed at something Grazka did. As Lilia grew, It became clear that she truly was a perfect blend of both her parents. She had Greshna's strength and resilience, already developing faster than a human child would. But she also had Aiden's curiosity and expressiveness, her face showing every emotion clearly. She was beautiful, unique, and Aiden knew she would face challenges because of her mixed heritage. But she would also have advantages, two cultures to draw from, two sets of traditions to guide her, and parents who loved her absolutely. When spring came again, and the mountain trails cleared, Aiden and Greshna made the journey to the eastern settlement as a family. They had debated whether to bring Lilia, whether to expose her to potential prejudice so young. But in the end, they decided that hiding her would only teach her to be ashamed of what she was, and that was a lesson they refused to impart. The reaction in the settlement was mixed. Some people stared and whispered. Others smiled at the baby with the genuine warmth that infants tend to inspire in most people, regardless of their heritage. The trader who had helped Aiden before cooed over Lilia, offering congratulations without any hint of judgment. But it was a woman in the settlement square who gave them the most hope. She was elderly, her face lined with years, and she approached them with a gentle smile. "Blessings on your family," she said simply. "It takes courage to love across boundaries, and your child is proof that such love can create something beautiful. May she grow strong and healthy, and may she always know she is loved." Greshna's eyes filled with tears, and Aiden felt his own throat tighten with emotion. It was such a simple thing, this acceptance from a stranger, but it meant everything. It suggested that perhaps the world was changing, that perhaps Lilia's path would not be as difficult as they feared. They returned to their homestead with renewed hope and determination. Aiden expanded the garden again, preparing to grow enough food for 3. Greshna began teaching Lilia songs and stories from Orcish culture, determined that her daughter would know her heritage even if she could never be part of a clan. Aiden taught Lilia human lullabies and began making plans to teach her to read as soon as she was old enough. The years passed with the rhythm of the seasons. Lilia grew into a bright, curious child who loved exploring the mountains and learning everything her parents could teach her. She showed aptitude for both combat and scholarship, able to track animals through the forest with Greshna, and then settle down to read books with Aiden. She was confident in herself, secure in the love of her parents, and showed no sign of being ashamed of her mixed heritage. When Lilia was 5, a small miracle occurred. A merchant caravan traveling through the region included an elderly orc female who had been cast out from her own clan for refusing to participate in a war she considered unjust. She had been traveling with the caravan as a guard, and when they stopped near Aiden's homestead to rest, she sought them out. Her name was Grazka, and she had heard rumors of a human-orc couple living in the mountains with a half-breed child. She had come to see if the rumors were true, and if so, to offer her services as a teacher. "The child should know both her heritages fully," Grazka said gruffly, studying Lilia with sharp eyes. "The human can teach her human ways, and the mother can teach her what she remembers of clan life. But I can teach her the deeper things, the old languages, the histories, the spiritual practices that give our people meaning. If you will have me, I will stay and teach her." Aiden and Greshna looked at each other, communicating in the silent way of long married couples. Then Greshna turned to Grazka and nodded. "You are welcome here. We would be honored to have you teach our daughter." Grazka moved into the barn, which they had expanded over the years to include a proper living space. She proved to be an excellent teacher, if a stern one. She taught Lilia the Orcish language until she was fluent, taught her the histories of the great clan wars and the heroes who had shaped their people. She also taught her about the spiritual practices, the connection to the earth and sky that gave orcs their strength. But more than that, Grazka gave Lilia something precious, a sense of belonging to the orcish part of her heritage that she could not have gotten from just her mother alone. She gave her a connection to a culture that she would never be fully part of, but could still honor and draw strength from. As Lilia approached adolescence, the challenges of her unique heritage became more apparent. She was stronger than human children, but not quite as strong as full orc children would be at her age. She was faster and more agile than most humans, but her small tusks, which had emerged as she grew, marked her as different. She dealt with these challenges with grace, finding her own identity that honored both sides of her heritage without being completely defined by either. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Aiden, Grazka, Lilia, and Grazka. Lilia asked the question that Aiden had been half dreading. "Do you think there are others like me? Other half-human, half-orc children?" Aiden and Grazka exchanged glances. "There must be," Grazka said carefully. "Your father and I cannot be the only ones who found love across the divide between our peoples, but such families likely hide, afraid of persecution from both sides." "That is sad," Lilia said thoughtfully. "People should not have to hide love." "You and father taught me that." "We did," Aiden agreed. "And perhaps one day when you are grown, you will help create a world where such families do not need to hide." Lilia smiled, an expression that showed both her small tusks and her very human dimples. "I would like that. I would like to help build bridges between humans and orcs, so that other children like me do not have to wonder if they are the only ones." Grazka nodded approvingly. "A worthy goal, child. The world needs bridge builders more than it needs warriors." As the years continued to pass, Aiden and Grazka watched their daughter grow into a remarkable young woman. She had her mother's strength and honor, her father's compassion and wisdom, and a unique perspective born of belonging to two worlds. She had plans to travel when she came of age, to seek out other mixed families, and create a network of support and understanding. But that was for the future. For now, Aiden was content to sit on the porch of his expanded cottage, Grazka beside him, and watch Lilia practice combat forms with Grazka in the clearing. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, and the air was filled with the sounds of life: chickens clucking, goats bleating, and the laughter of his daughter as she finally managed to execute a particularly difficult technique. "We did well," Grazka said softly, echoing his thoughts. "We did," Aiden agreed, taking her hand in his. "Against all odds, against all expectations, we built something beautiful." "All because you opened the door that seventh night," Grazka said, squeezing his hand. "All because you showed kindness when you could have shown indifference or fear." Aiden thought back to that morning when he had first found Grazka sleeping outside his door, exhausted and injured and desperate. He thought about all the choices he could have made differently, sending her away, refusing to help, keeping his heart closed and his life isolated. Each of those choices would have been easier in the moment, but would have cost him everything that made his life worth living now. "I opened the door," he said, "but you chose to stay. You chose to trust me, to love me, to build this life with me. We did this together, Grazka. Everything we have, everything we are, we created together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun completed its descent, darkness creeping across the mountains. Inside the cottage, lanterns glowed warm and welcoming. Soon they would go inside, share a meal with their daughter and their friend, and settle in for another peaceful evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But for now, Aiden was content to simply exist in this perfect moment, his wife beside him, his daughter safe and happy, and his heart full of a love he had never expected to find. He had opened the door that seventh night, and in doing so, he had opened himself to possibilities he had never imagined. He had found not just love, but family, not just companionship, but partnership, not just survival, but purpose. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Aiden sent a silent prayer of thanks to whatever fates or gods had guided Grazka to his door, to whatever force in the universe had brought them together. He was grateful for every moment of their journey, from those first awkward days to this perfect evening, and he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. His story, their story, had begun with a simple act of kindness opening a door to someone in need. And from that small beginning had grown a love that transcended boundaries, a family that defied expectations, and a legacy that would ripple out into the world through their daughter and beyond. It was more than he had ever hoped for, more than he had ever dreamed possible. As Lilia called them inside for dinner, her voice bright with joy, Aiden stood and helped Grazka to her feet. They walked hand in hand toward the welcoming light of their home, toward the family and love they had built together. And in that simple moment, Aiden knew with absolute certainty that opening the door that seventh night had been the best decision he had ever made, and every day since had only confirmed that truth. Their happily ever after was not without challenges, not without struggles and hard days. But it was real and earned and infinitely precious. And as they crossed the threshold into their warm, lamp-lit home, surrounded by the people they loved most in the world, Aiden felt a peace settle over him that he had not known since before the war, the peace of knowing he was exactly where he belonged, with exactly who he was meant to be with, living exactly the life he was meant to live. The door that had once been closed to protect his solitude now stood open to welcome his family. And that, Aiden knew, made all the difference.